that makes me feel better.
Like, I feel like now technology can be a good thing or a bad thing, but I feel like they barely even fly the plane. They probably just like do a couple things and it probably like flies.
Pretty much, I think. Well, I remember, yeah, I remember a couple years ago, there was a case of like, they do have autopilot and they put it on autopilot and neither the pilot nor the co-pilot were paying attention and they like overshot the airport. I remember that being on the news. People would be like, oh my gosh. Like, hey, did they crash? No, the plane knew what it was doing.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Good morning, good morning.
We played EMU today, and last year when we played them, a senior on their team broke my finger.
Oh no.
And I found out like a week ago that she's in the 5th year, and I was like,
Oh, no.
she's still there. Can't wait for tonight.
Is it here?
No, and it's at 7 o'clock at EMU.
Ugh.
Yeah, so we probably won't get back till 2 a.m. But it's our last one.
That's how we already did.
Where do you play?
Right off Macon.
Do you play at Randolph? Randolph's like.
Those are
literally, like,
both a hike.
I didn't realize how close Randolph Macon was, though. I thought Randolph was like 3 hours away.
I did too.
No, it's like literally like right around the corner. We took vans because we have such a small team that they were like, hey, anytime you can take a van, please do. Because like we don't have like the money for it.
Yeah.
So we took a van and we didn't stop for the bathroom and like I was completely fine. Like we got there in like an hour and like 30 minutes. And then on the way back, there was like no traffic. We got home so fast.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's how it be. We
Yeah.
played at 4, so I mean.
Oh, that's not bad. Y'all will get back at like latest like 8 o'clock. Our game goes on. But y'all don't even go into overtime or anything at the time.
Not anymore.
Wait, have y'all played Randolph this year?
We played Randolph. We played Randolph Macon.
Oh, we don't play Randolph. I always say Randolph when I'm talking about Randolph Macon. I forget there's another Randolph one.
It's really confusing.
Yeah. That's so weird that y'all spend in a size.
I don't like it, but
Yeah. So I like have to get go and you're probably like, oh, it's hot. And then you just stop. Like we'll go into 2 overtimes. Then we go to 1. If no one scores, go to another. And then you go to shootouts.
yeah, that's how I think it should be for us.
Yeah.
But they changed the rules last year.
Is it like that even in ODAC play? When you get to ODAC, you go to overtime?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to have a winner in that.
Okay.
Alrighty, so we're gonna start today with an activity. I'm using a website called Poll Everywhere. It has the link on it, but it puts it at the top and the projector cuts it off. So this is the link. It's pollev.com and then it's my name, Taryn Myers, and then the number 601. I don't know why those are the numbers it gave me. It is. And so there are some questions about what we talked about with the Hawthorne effect the other day. What sort of things might actually help people to work more efficiently, more effectively. So the first one I have up is, if you were an office worker, which of the following changes do you think would help your work improve the most?
Does it matter which letters are capitalized?
I don't think so, just based on like how the internet works. Okay, and while you guys are doing that, I'm just gonna pull up the participant list over here so that I can take attendance. Oh, that's weird. So pollev.com. All good, happens with the best of us. And I feel like it has a mind of its own, and sometimes it lets you go through all the questions, and sometimes it makes you do them one at a time. So if it lets you do all of them, go ahead. If not, I'll give this one another minute, and then we'll move on to the next one. Alrighty, I'm gonna go to the next one. Yeah, so it looks like a lot of people were saying more comfortable seating, but this also proves a really good point that it might be different for different people, right? That some people might like one thing more than another. I love that no one chose the open seating plan. This was like very trendy a couple of years ago, where it's like, there are no cubicles or anything, and people are like, it will make people work together better. And in fact, like all the IO studies show that productivity drastically decreases because like no one can concentrate. Alrighty. So some of you have already been typing on this one, which is great. What type of change do you think would actually help office workers the most? So more breaks, yes. Up-to-date equipment. You're an office with walls, yeah, going along with what I just said. Better equipment, positive work environment. Having their own space to think and focus on what needs to be done. More windows, yes. Oh my gosh, my window is like a saving grace in my office. So a space that feels comfortable to them. A friendly work environment, a lighter, more positive atmosphere. And if I didn't say this, folks on Zoom, obviously you all can be participating too. Just go to the link that you see at the top of your screen. Personnel changes for individual workers shows they're all cared for. Yeah, I think this is really important, right? Again, as we just mentioned, for some people, some things are going to work, for other people, different things are going to work. I think having an open floor plan, comfortable seating, and some sort of music playing, better equipment and more lighting. Yeah, I think that that helps a lot of folks. All right, and then choose one word for what office workers need to be most productive and feel valued. And I love that everybody's kind of choosing a different word right now. I love that coffee is on there. That's certainly, I think, in a lot of workplaces, important. Support and respect are popping out more now. Yeah, I think that's a huge thing, is that oftentimes, you know, and to be fair, there are studies showing these things work, but people will focus on these sort of superficial changes, right? When what people really need and want are these things, are wanting to feel supported, wanting to feel respected. All right. And the next question is, what type of changes would help you to focus and do well in classroom settings? Interaction, yeah, I try to do that in my classes. Comfort and less distractions. Yeah, less lighting. These lights are pretty awful. Not only so you can see the screen, but also for that reason, it's why I try to do only half of the lights on in here. More interesting lessons. Yeah, lectures can be really tough. I agree, and I'm the one lecturing. More engaging and interactive activities. Yeah, I think that those are really important. I'm going to give this one a minute as people type. I know it could take a minute to get stuff in there. But these, I think, are the type of questions we should be asking, right? It's like, what do workers or students actually want? What do they feel would actually be helpful to them? Rather than something some consultant comes up with as like, this is the brand new thing that'll make it all better. Good, like better seats. I agree. These chairs are awful. Whenever I have to sit in these, I would like, people are doing activities or whatever, I'm just like, how do this do this? I would just like to do this like that, because it's a little stuff. So yeah, I said that's a big piece of it as well. You know, just from a medical standpoint, it'd be great to get a better ventilation, right? If, you know, we're in older buildings right here, so we're on a boiler system, so like once the heat is on, it's on. Once the air is on, it's on, right? And so that's why we have to do things like open the windows, and there's not good airflow. And this is not unique to Wesleyan. I saw someone post on Twitter that they went to like a lecture hall at a big university, and you could get these like air quality monitors, and the air quality was also awful in this university that presumably has a lot more money than we do, right? Ventilation is just not something we've thought about in the past. But yeah, I think you all have some really good ideas here as well. Alrighty. So that's just another way I can do some of these interactive activities at the beginning, and no one has to like call out what they're thinking. So I'll do some more of those throughout the semester. Alrighty, gonna go ahead and turn on our caption. So just to remind y'all what we were talking about on Monday, we've been talking about job evaluations and how we give feedback. And so this is a diagram of that 360 feedback we had been talking about. I think sometimes it's easier to visualize something, understand something when you have a diagram like this. So the idea is that, you know, most of the time when there's a performance evaluation, it would just be the purple to the blue, right? It's just your supervisor evaluates you, and that's your performance evaluation. What a 360 evaluation does is has a lot more people giving feedback. So again, if you're in a public facing job, might be your clients or customers, right? Their feedback. This is why a lot of places have like, fill out our survey for a chance to be entered in blah, 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 because they're trying to get this type of feedback. You would evaluate yourself as well. Give your honest feedback on how you think you're doing. If you're in a supervisory position, your subordinates would also evaluate you. I know this is something that we've been asking for here, and they've actually started doing with our deans, is that the faculty members in each academic school actually evaluate their deans each year. And then your supervisor would also be part of it, but then also the people on the same level as you, your peers, your coworkers. So all those things would evaluate your actual performance, and they would be combined into your performance evaluation. So rather than just one piece of feedback, you will be getting this nice sort of integrated reflection on how you've been doing. And this can be really helpful to people. One of my colleagues told a story recently about when there was a place where she'd been working at a different university, not here, and they had like a online anonymous form where they could evaluate each other. And like someone had put under hers, like not willing to contribute to the team. And what that stemmed from is they were going to some sort of like job internship fair type thing. And this was a while ago. And they were like, we think the women should wear short skirts to attract more people to the table. And like the male colleagues wrote in this anonymous feedback, like, this is the reason why you're saying it, and that's totally unacceptable. But she said it annoyed her because she wished they'd like spoken up when someone said that. But again, with power dynamics, that can be tricky, right? So one of the things you're trying to do when you give an appraisal is not make your employee feel like they're on trial, and to make them feel like this is being done in a fair way, really taking everything into account. So in terms of what increases that sense of fairness in employees getting their feedback, having a face-to-face meeting. I'm sure like video chat would also be really effective. Giving the employee the opportunity to self-evaluate, right? Because then they can give feedback on things that have impacted them. So yes, I might not have been as efficient on my task for this supervisor, but that's because I had 2 other supervisors who were also giving me tasks, right? And it was unclear what I was supposed to prioritize. Another thing that they'll do is do like training for rating. So everyone learns how to use the rating system in the way that they want it used. You know, when you give someone a rating system, one person's 3 could be another person's 5. Like this is something I've learned. I supervise our internship class and I give the supervisors an evaluation to turn in for their interns. And like for some supervisors, like a 3 out of 5 is great. That's what they're shooting for. And then for other supervisors, it's a 5 out of 5. And so, you know, if I were to sit down and like give them training on that, we could bring that to where everybody's using the same metric.
Like one of my teammates was having concussion and they give you like a scale of like your head pain and all the rest of the symptoms. And she was like, oh, I put this. And I was like, oh, what's the highest? And she was like, that. And I was like, why'd you put that? I was like, you're able to, and me and my other friend, like we both kind of like think the same way. And we're like, you're able to get out of bed, walk there, and go talk to her and fill it out. We're like, if you can do all that, you're not at the highest level. Like,
Right.
we're like, I would put the highest if I literally physically couldn't even like get to my phone or something to like tell her what I was. Like, so it's like same thing. Like the scale, like when you go to the doctor, like I would never put a 10 if I could like physically like speak to them or something.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. Yeah, because everyone has different pain thresholds. So for example, I have a friend who did her entire childbirth without any kind of drugs. And she said like, she never realized until she gave birth that her period cramps are so excruciating that it actually wasn't that less worse than like giving birth, right? And that's different for different people. And so, you know, what would have been, you know, maybe a 10 for some other people, for her was like, oh, this is 5, right? So yeah, everybody's body is different, everybody's experience and interpretations are different. Kind of going along with that, again, thinking about the 360, having multiple people rate that person. This also, in terms of equity, starts to skirt if like you have one person in the company who just doesn't get along with you, right? Or is unfortunately biased against your race, your gender, what have you in some way. Another thing that really enhances a sense of fairness on feedback is talking about opportunities to improve, right? And so sometimes this is prescriptive. They'll be like, here's the things you need to do in order to, you know, sometimes to keep your job if you're really not doing well, but often to like see improvement on your next performance eval. And that makes people feel like, oh, there are things I can do. And also having an appeal process. So if you feel that you've been unfairly rated, there should be someone you can go to, whether it's, you know, a person above your supervisor, whether it's HR, to appeal and say, I don't think this was a fair and accurate judgment of the way that I work. So in terms of, we've been talking about industrial psychology. So remember, we're talking about industrial / organizational. They've kind of merged together, but organizational started as more of an emphasis on research and practice, really involving human relations. So topics here that we're going to cover, and again, each of these will have their own slides. But how do you approach management? There are different like philosophies and methods you use for managing your employees. Job satisfaction, employee commitment. Are the employees just like punching their time card, or actually are they like really committed to helping the company survive and succeed? The meaning of work for people. and then leadership styles. So we're going to talk first about the various management approaches. And as you can see, there are at least 4. There are probably more than this. But I'm going to go to the chart because it kind of helps a little more here. So the quote unquote Japanese style, the theorist who first described this was Deming. And this was W. Edwards Deming in the 1940s, and it was a focus on quality. And this management style comes from the automotive industry in Japan. So the Japanese really picked up on this pretty early on in their automotive industry. Americans didn't start to use this style until the 1980s, when Japanese car companies started to outperform American car companies in sales. And they were like, whoa, what's working over there that's not working for us? And it really helped the Japanese to rebuild after World War II. Again, thinking about things in a historical context, we dropped 2 nuclear bombs, right, on 2 cities, 2 big cities in Japan, right? The country was devastated by the war. And the idea is that the industry must embrace innovation and be prepared for the future. So the manager's mission in this style is that focus on the future. And the idea is that you're always seeking innovation and high quality. You want to forge strong relationships with people in every part and every aspect of the organization. And the idea was that by doing that, then all of your employees would buy into this idea of like making the best quality product that they could. The manager's problem-solving strategy in this approach is to take risks, to think about the future, to try something new. So it's about innovation, but doing that innovation in a well-done way, right? We're not just going to throw something at the wall and see if it sticks. If we're going to innovate, we're also going to make sure we maintain the quality. And so the manager's focus when things are going well is to keep looking to the future, to potential innovation, and to keep risks in mind. So that's the quote unquote Japanese style. In Theory X and Theory Y were both devised by a theorist named McGregor. Theory X, the managers motivate by exerting control and threatening punishment. For some of you, this may sound familiar for places you worked, unfortunately. Unfortunately, this often makes work innately unpleasant, and people have a strong desire to avoid it. The idea is like you have to keep people in line. So the manager's mission within Theory X approach is to control employees and enforce rules and make sure everyone like has their nose to the grindstone, is working really hard, keep the ship afloat. Their problem-solving strategy is to punish people when they fail. And they reward employees who succeed, but they're not going to like reward innovation. They're like, don't rock the boat, just do your job well. As you can imagine, like you can like get out a product this way, but this may not be the most successful. So Theory Y, also from McGregor, the managers motivate by allowing their workers to participate in problem solving. So the idea here is that engaging in effortful behavior is natural to human beings. Like people work hard even when they're at play. This is why people like doing stuff like running or golfing, right, for their recreation. Or even people that knit, like that stuff's not that easy, right? And that people want responsibility and will seek it out, and we should give them opportunities to do so. So in Theory Y, you're going to challenge your employees with responsibility. You're going to let them apply the talents, the insights, the abilities that they have. You'll look to your employees for input, and you'll try to harness their wisdom and insight to problem solve rather than just trying to solve it all yourself. And then you'll talk to your employees about their insights into success and what you can do next. So it's a very collaborative process, and you're making use of the resources you have in your employees. And then the strengths-based approach is by a theorist called Clifton. And this is about maximizing an employee's existing strengths, and that doing that is much easier than trying to build them from the ground up. So a strength within this model is a consistent ability to attain a great performance on a given task. You might even call it a near perfect performance on a given task. So the idea within the strengths-based approach is that each person has unique talents. So you want to discover them and put them to use. And the idea is not only is that key to the company's success, but also to the worker's sense of fulfillment. I'm using my strengths. I feel like I'm appreciated. I'm able to use what I can bring to the table. So the manager's mission is to identify those employee strengths and match employees with jobs that will maximize those. Their problem-solving strategy, if there is a problem, they'll re-examine the fit between the employee strengths and assigned tasks. They might realize, oh, we've given you some tasks that just don't match your strengths. Let's delegate those to somebody else and give you stuff that you'll be really good at. And then when things are going well, you'll continue to build on employee strengths as well. What else can we do knowing that we have people who are good at this task? So that is, again, just 4 examples of management approaches. Now, in terms of job satisfaction, one of the things that we do is try to measure work attitudes. How do employees actually feel about work in general and in their job in particular? So what we find, maybe not surprisingly, as we go into looking at job satisfaction, is the fairness of compensation. So things like, are people doing the same job with the same experience being paid the same, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, age, etc.? Also, personality characteristics of individuals, right? We know that some people are just harder to please than others. But one of the most important that organizational psychologists would look at is cultural influences, right? So we can think about this in terms of workplace culture. You know, what sort of environment are you creating for your employees? Is it supportive? But it can also be the larger culture, right? What values are important within that country, within the population you're working with, and are you emphasizing those? Like, you could be really good at your job, but if you feel like you're doing something not great, right, you probably won't have the best job satisfaction. You'll feel like it's soul-sucking. And the impact on job satisfaction is that there's lower absenteeism. People actually go to work, right? They don't call in for no reason. There's also lower turnover. So turnover is when people leave and you have to hire new people. And I think for a long time, and maybe even still a little bit today, companies sort of have the idea that, like, oh, whatever, we'll just hire somebody else. It's no big deal. But more and more people are starting to realize how expensive turnover is, right? Because every new person you hire, you've got to spend employee time and money, reading resumes, interviewing people, training the people, right? And then oftentimes you're going to have to pay them an initial higher starting wage or salary because the market may have changed. I was at a workshop a few years back talking about some of these types of things in academia. And if you need to replace a professor, it actually costs you 1.5 times the current professor's salary. because it's a pretty expensive process. We often like fly people in and give them dinner and put them up in a hotel, which is all really nice, but it all costs money. And then again, you're often gonna have to pay them a higher starting salary. So it's a lot better to try to retain your folks. Other things that impact job satisfaction is better organizational citizenship and performance. So do you feel, again, like connected to the organization? Do you feel like your talents are being used? Do you feel like you can participate? Do you feel appreciated in some of the ways that we talked about in our initial activity today, right? And then that's going to impact your performance. I mean, if you feel like you're doing well at your job, you're often more satisfied with it, right? If you feel like you're really struggling, you might, and you're not getting the help you need, then you might be less satisfied. So that relates to the idea of employee commitment. And basically, as I just talked about with the money it takes to hire someone, it's in the organization's best interest to keep the person around, to keep employees around. Oftentimes, you like the people you hired. That's why you hired them over the other candidates, right? And you've often spent time and money training them. And that investment kind of is gone if they leave and go somewhere else. And obviously, in certain industries, that's even more problematic if you train somebody up and now they go to your competitor and they share that information, right? So a couple different types of commitment here. One is affective commitment. This is emotional attachment to the organization. So do you actually feel connected to the organization? Do you feel like you believe in what the company is doing? Do you believe that the company believes in you, right? I'll give you a kind of silly example, but professors really only have 2 opportunities in their lives if they're on tenure track to get promoted. It's when you go from assistant professor to associate professor. Oftentimes you get tenure then as well, and that just means you can't be fired unless you break the law, basically. And then when you go from associate to full. And last year I went from associate to full. And when our administrative assistant for academic affairs brought around my letter, she also brought like a little bouquet of flowers. And yeah, it was exactly that. It was like, this is just such a nice little gesture that this is a celebration, right? And it kind of brightened my day, and I posted it on my socials and everyone was like, that's so nice. Right, and it's just little stupid stuff. It probably didn't cost them that much money, right? But it makes me feel like they're invested in me, and I in turn can invest back in the university even more than I already am. Continuance commitment is the perception of the economic and social costs of leaving the organization. So basically, is it going to be more stressful for me to leave and try to find another job than it is to stay? So if you're working someplace that has like all those benefits we talked about on Monday, right? And you know that maybe other places don't, right? It might be hard for you to leave because you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna get what I need. Another thing, you know, again, if we talk about sort of the negative aspects of things, is the idea that sometimes there are like what are called non-compete clauses in your contract, where if you leave your job, you cannot work in the same industry for, you know, a year, something like that. That makes it hard for you to leave, right? And sometimes it is, well, if I left, I'd have to kind of strike out on my own. So I have a friend who did this when she left her job. She was a lawyer, she started her own firm. And like for her, that actually worked really well, and it's made her more mobile because her husband is sort of in flux in terms of where he needs to work for his job. And so that works really well. But for a lot of people, just like the startup costs of starting your own business might be overwhelming. And then normative commitment is just a sense of obligation to the organization, right? And this can be good or bad, depending. All right, so then thinking about the meaning of work. So you will hear this sometimes that people will talk about jobs versus careers. And then more rarely, you'll hear people talking about their calling. And so a job is where you often have like no training for that in particular. You are just sort of like doing it to get money. You have sort of personal control over whether you stay there or move on. So there's a lot of freedom, right? So like I mentioned Monday, I worked at Kohl's when I was in high school and college. I could have easily gone and worked for Target or JCPenney, right? Or any of the other places. It wasn't going to be my career. Your career is something that often you have been training for. So for example, when y'all graduate, you're often going to be wanting to start a career within whatever field you want to go into. And work becomes an opportunity for advancement, right? Moving up that corporate ladder. Again, in academia, finding that tenure track job, getting through those ranks to where you're a full professor. Things along those lines. A calling is when work has a value to you beyond economics. So it's like you feel that this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is something that intrinsically is valuable to you. You will hear people talk about like, I feel like this is my life's calling. I am very lucky, and it's sad that I have to say I'm very lucky. But I got a 6-month maternity leave when I had my daughter. Typically in the US, you maybe get 12 weeks and often that's unpaid. But our VPAA at the time loved babies. So he was just like, yeah, go for it. And I loved having that time with my daughter, but near the end of it, I realized like I genuinely miss teaching. And I realized that teaching really is my calling. And I wanted to be back in the classroom. And there are other people who like are professors and that's not their calling. Research is, right? So the teaching is just something they have to check off, right? We know that the meaning of work has a relationship to psychological well-being. So the higher your levels of job satisfaction, often your life satisfaction is higher, and both of those are linked to feeling like your job is a calling. So if you're in something where you feel like that fulfilled and like this is what I'm supposed to be, you're going to have higher job satisfaction and higher life satisfaction. And both of those are linked to overall psychological well-being, which can include things like if you run into mental health issues, you can adapt pretty quickly, things along those lines. And then job crafting are the physical and cognitive changes that individuals make within existing task constraints. So this is where you might sort of make your own work and come up with tasks that are important to you or that give you a sense of fulfillment, right? So like I could, and I have in the past, right, just come in and teach this class straight lecture, no interaction, none of these activities. But I recognized I was not teaching this course as well as I could. And so y'all are getting to benefit from me saying like, what can we do in this chapter to kind of spice it up, right? Or let's say you work an office job, just kind of plodding along, but your office is planning a big fundraising event. And you know that like organization of that type of event is something that's in your wheelhouse and that you love, you might volunteer to be part of that process. And then there are different leadership styles of the folks who are CEOs, but down onto the managerial level as well. So transactional leadership is basically someone who would work within the theory X approach, that sort of punitive approach we talked about. Transactional leadership emphasizes an exchange relationship between workers and leaders. What can you do for me? Transactional leadership believes people are motivated by rewards and punishments. An advantage of this type of leadership is they will provide clarity and structure to employees. So there will be clear policies and your job tasks will be very clear as well. Transformational leadership emphasizes change and a vision for the organization. I'm trying to see, I do not have the 4 key elements on a slide, so I'll be really slow in reading them for y'all. So the 4 key elements here, the first is providing idealized influence, providing idealized influence. So the idea is, let's think about the best we can be, and me as a leader, I'm going to try to emulate that. The second element is inspiring others to achieve, inspiring others to achieve. So again, people aren't just checking a box, doing their job, they're going to genuinely want to succeed, genuinely want to participate. The third is intellectually stimulating your employees, intellectually stimulating your employees. So you are going to give them tasks that are not mind numbing. You're going to try to challenge them. So we can kind of think of this as like the theory why, or even the strengths based, right? Where you're giving them things that don't just feel like they're a cog in the wheel. They have to think and use their skills. And the fourth one is really important. It's showing concern for employee well-being. Showing concern for employee well-being. Do people stop and genuinely ask, how are you doing? Are resources provided for if the employee is not doing well, right? So some companies will have what's called an employee assistance program, or EAP. And for some big companies, that's like right on site. And it is counselors, psychologists who do therapy right there. And you get like 6 sessions a year or something like that with no cost, don't even have to use your insurance. Other places will do things like yoga classes or meditation, things along those lines, but also physical health things, right? Wesleyan has been on a big physical health kick, and they'll try to let's all meet at the trails and walk together, or things along those lines. Transformational leadership is also going to promote the employee's organizational identity. So making employees feel like they're a part of the company, that they really identify as part of an employee of the company, but also someone who's contributing to the company. So as you can imagine, transformational leadership can in fact redefine organizational culture and make it more aspirational. So organizational culture consists of the shared values, beliefs, norms, and customs, things that influence everyday behavior of employees. So obviously, the vast majority of companies, although some won't care, the Theory X ones won't care, right? But want to create a positive organizational culture. So one of the things that they'll emphasize is positive reinforcement. So this, if you took Psych 101, this goes back to learning theory. This is just the idea that you'll get rewards for good work. And oftentimes those are things like bonuses, right? Or a raise. And then compassion. Empathizing with the suffering of another and doing something to alleviate that suffering. So here it's compassion for your employees. Do nice things for them. So if you remember on the chart we looked at Monday, one of the companies that was on there was the Container Store. And one of the things they do is that they have what they call kid-friendly hours from 9 to 2, so that parents can both drop off and pick up their kiddos, and the kiddos don't have to be in any kind of aftercare, which is also often very expensive. Then there's virtuousness or moral goodness, doing the right thing. So employees are going to respect employers more that do this. customers often respect employers more. And studies actually show this helps buffer against the negative effects of downsizing. So if a company does have to dramatically cut the workforce, but employees understand they're doing it for virtuous reasons, they're less, I mean, you're still gonna be upset if you're one of the people who loses your job, but it's like they understand why it's happening. So obviously, there are workplaces that are not a positive organizational culture. And one of those is the toxic workplace. So there are a bunch of different factors that go into this. Some of the primary ones are workplace incivility. That everyone's like really impolite, rude, cold to each other. You don't feel like people want to be there, like people are supporting each other. Workplace aggression and violence. So verbal abusiveness, bullying of other employees. I mean, there are unfortunate circumstances where this can escalate to full-on assault and battery or even homicide. Right, we've all heard those horror stories of the disgruntled employee who comes in with an AK-47. And then sexual harassment. And we're going to talk more about sexual harassment on Friday. I'm going to stop a little early just because I want to talk about all the sexual harassment stuff together. So we will do that, and we'll do another activity on Friday as well. Alrighty, thanks to Zoom people for being here. Thanks to in-person people for being here.